Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Soul School. Hi, Jeff. How are you tonight, darling?
Hi, Andrea. I'm well. How are you?
Good, good. Yes,
Mm,
we both have our coffee. We're good to
we do.
go. Absolutely
Yep.
good to go.
I'm on about half a pot right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm. It's been one of those days. It's been a half a pot day. It has.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeehaw, classes in session, and what a week. Remember the movie Splash? I think it was, I can't remember who it was that came out. He's like, what a week I'm having. It's been, yeah, it's been
Yeah.
the week from hell, and
Mm,
yet there have been aspects which are heavenly,
mm.
absolutely heavenly, and magical things have been happening, and extraordinary things have been happening. Um, but it's been a tough week, and I know it has been for you as well. And
Mhm.
I think that that's something, the stars are all aligning. There's going to be like 5 planets all lined up together this weekend in the sky.
Mm.
Um, Kind of a cosmic convergence of sorts going on, and the energies are swirling like crazy. And everybody's feeling it, but they don't know what they're feeling. And a lot of people are saying, oh God, I feel like I'm being dragged to the dark side, dragged to the dark side.
Mm.
Um, and I think that we should talk about that, because if,
Yeah.
as we often do, Jeff, we feel it, if we're feeling it, other people are feeling it too.
Sure.
And
Certainly.
so that's the whole point of Soul School, is the whole notion that we're all in class together, we're all learning from each other. It's a group effort.
Absolutely.
So I know that, we talked earlier about this, the push me, pull you aspects of 3D and how difficult it can be. And so I'm going to let you run with it, because I know it's been swirling in your mind for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good evening, everybody. For one, did we say the line? Did we open it? I don't remember if we did.
Yes, classes in
Class is
session.
in session. Okay. Class is indeed in session. So you had earlier in the week, you sent me an article, and it had set me to thinking about some things that I kind of this. I'm always already thinking about it when you send it to me, and I think the same
I know.
goes on your end too, because
Yes, it
we have
does.
that connection like that.
There's a certain simpatico.
There certainly is. But it was simply about the dark side of emotions and how embracing embracing the darker side of our own emotional makeup is actually good and beneficial and healthy for us. And the things that we often try to avoid and run from are actually the things that make life fulfilling in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
which is kind of a crazy thing to say when you're in the middle of it. But on the other side of it, it's one of those things we realize. There's a lot of instances in the Old Testament and in the New Testament where individuals find themselves in the presence of God, but they only recognize it in reverse. And so there's a rabbinic statement that theophanies or divine appearances are only recognized in reverse. You rarely recognize that you're in the presence of God when you're in the presence of God. You
Mhm.
rarely recognize that you're being transformed by the divine when you're being transformed by the divine. But on the other side of it, you're like, oh, surely God
Oh,
was in this place and I knew it not, to quote Jacob, right?
yeah.
So that's often how it goes with the darker times of life. And I was thinking about there's so many things I want to say about this. So many different ways we could tackle this, and so many different angles we could come at it from. But I want to start with a quote by Carl Jung, and I'm sure many of you know this quote. It's very famous, but he simply said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The latter procedure, however, is disagreeable and therefore not popular. Whether it's New Age spirituality, Christian spirituality, whatever brand of spirituality, for the most part, we talk about being enlightened or having an awakening or a revelatory experience or an epiphanic moment. And we think in terms of light and goodness and all of this stuff. But for me, the most revelatory moments and revolutionary moments in my life have actually been those moments where I've come face to face with, let's call them my own inner demons. And I don't really even like that terminology because we
Right.
associate that word with something, but I mean something very different when I say it. But when I
As I
encounter,
mean, when I say prayer, when I say I'm praying, it means something entirely different than it does to probably a whole lot of people out there. So yeah, I
Absolutely.
totally
Yeah.
get you. Yeah.
But when I come face to face with aspects of myself I did not really necessarily know were there, and it took maybe some darker experiences to unlock. And so here we go. Let's start from here. A few years back, and by a few, I mean over a decade ago, I've told my stories on here before, so I won't tell it all again. You can go back and probably hear it in one of a dozen different episodes. But I was a pastor for many years, and I underwent an experience where I really had a crisis of faith for a lot of different reasons that I won't go into. And I really lost my faith for a season. I was an atheist while pastoring and serving on a pastoral staff. Very difficult, very dark season of life in a lot of ways. But again, on the other side of it, I see it as actually having been a season of light because I learned a lot of things about myself I didn't know about myself prior to the experience. Now, on the other side of having stepped away from that position and, having experienced financial loss, relational losses, all sorts of different things, I came face to face with situations that I had never had to face before in my life. Situations that, quite frankly, were, well, they sucked, they were very trying. My experience of life prior to that experience was very much like the Edenic walled garden, where I lived in a kind of state of blissful naivete of the world around me. Financially, I was always provided for. I was doing what I loved doing. I didn't know what it was at that point, except for, working at Target for a few years during college. I didn't know what it was at that point to hold a job that I didn't love and that didn't thrill me. I mean, even like I said, when I was undergoing the crisis of faith as a pastor, still I had a platform like 3 times a week where I got to lecture and I got to teach. That's what I love doing. That's who I am, man. I eat, drink, breathe, sleep, that kind of stuff. And so I was compensated decently for doing it. I mean, it was a good life, it really was. I didn't really know what it was yet to, have to work a job that at the end of it all, I was like, God almighty, that sucked today. I mean, I was always refreshed by what I did. Life was good. It was the Edenic walled garden. I was in that state of blissful naivete. However, when I said this last week, there always comes that point in life where you pluck that forbidden fruit. You partake from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You partake of a brand of knowledge that changes you and changes your understanding of the world. And once you taste that fruit, you're expelled from the garden and you can never go back in through the gate you left from. And so I found myself in that place, and I found myself out there, outside the walls of the garden, in this place of thorns and thistles and sweat of your brow sort of stuff. And in that time period, I really saw some things in myself that I never saw before because I had to enter the quote unquote workforce, which is normal life for everybody else. But for me, I'd only known, again, the naive Edenic experience of doing this thing that I loved, and I'm dealing with bosses, and I'm dealing with coworkers, and I'm dealing with stress, and I'm dealing with financial, all these things that I had just never experienced before. I mean, it might seem like absolute peanuts to some people compared to what you experienced, but relative to my experience of life up until that point, it was hellish, and I'm making it sound even better than it was because it actually was very trying and very traumatic for a lot of different reasons. But during that period of time, I began to find emotions surfacing in me that I had no idea were there. I remember bloodying my knuckles one day on a wall because I couldn't handle the stress. And I am a peaceful person through and through. I do not lose my temper. The amount of times I've raised my voice in the last 3 decades, like, you could probably count them on one hand. I'm not that kind of a person. I don't lose my temper. I don't lash out. That's just not me. It's not my makeup. But I remember things just being brought out of me that I'd never seen these things. I'd never experienced them before. Emotions and feelings towards people of anger and even hatred and thoughts of just like, God, I want to kill that person. I mean, and it broke me because I was like, this is not me. This isn't who I am. I'm Jeff. I'm gentle and I'm nonviolent and I'm a pacifist and I'm all this kind of stuff. But these things were coming up out of me that I had never seen before. And it was traumatic to see them. And you know what? It's traumatic when you see those aspects of yourself that you didn't know were there. But that is the shadow. That's the side of us that we like to push down and tamp down and pretend doesn't exist, but it exists. And the more that you ignore it, the worse it becomes. But Jung says, look, real enlightenment is not about imagining figures of light. It's about embracing that shadow side of yourself that you try to pretend isn't there. And when you embrace it, when you look at it, and I'm like, in this moment, I'm like, why are these emotions that are so wild and untamed coming out of me? And I'm like, oh, well, that's probably because for the last 3 decades plus, they were never allowed to express themselves.
Surface at all. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, because I thought it was sinful. I thought it was this. I thought it was that. I thought it was the other. Plus, I was never really in situations where I needed those things, right?
Yep.
Because my life was relatively calm and peaceful and serene. But now in these moments, I need these things, apparently. And so it shocked me. It shook me to my core to see these emotions coming out of me. And but over time, I began to realize something. And to use a scriptural phrase, Jesus says that you're supposed to be as wise as serpents, but as innocent as a dove, right? Up until that point, I had only known the innocence of the dove, and I had never known the wisdom or the shrewdness of the serpent, right? And in the prophet Isaiah says that when the kingdom of God, mystically speaking, comes, that the wolf and the lamb will lay down together, right? That this predatory, this wolf and this lamb, the predator and prey, coexist with one another peacefully when the quote kingdom of God, this esoteric reality, is established. These two things dwell together in unity. And I began to think about this, and I began to realize that I had really been an underdeveloped and incomplete being up until I experienced these dark times, because there was this whole other side of myself that I had ignored, that I had pushed down, that I didn't know was there. And as a result of not knowing this thing was there were certain aspects of life I just couldn't deal with. And so the truth was, my life prior to this wasn't actually all that serene and calm and peaceful. It's just that I avoided situations that I didn't know how to deal with, because there was the part of me that could deal with that situation had not yet been unlocked by the hardships and the trials of life. I only knew the dove-like innocence. I only knew the lamb. I had never encountered the wolf. I never encountered the shrewdness of the serpent. And these things aren't bad. They're not evil. They're strengths that have to be tempered and balanced out by this other aspect of us and our personalities and the divine within us. But we don't come in contact with these things until we experience hardships. And that was my experience anyways. And there's a great Jesus says, I think it's in Matthew chapter 10, I think he says, Matthew chapter 10, he says, don't fear the one who can kill the body but leave the soul unharmed. He says, rather fear or have respect and reverence for the one who can kill the body and then destroy both body and soul in hell. It's rendered in English translations, but the word is Gehenna. Now that sounds really horrible on the surface, and anytime you read something like this, literally it's going to sound horrible. So you have to understand the metaphorical meaning behind it. So Jesus says, don't have an extreme form of reverence for the one who can only kill the body but leave the soul unharmed. He says, rather have an extreme form of reverence for the one who could destroy both the body and soul in Gehenna. And it's like, okay, well, that still sounds terrible, even if you put a positive spin on it or paraphrase it. But the next line is, what does he say? He says, 2 sparrows are sold for a penny in the marketplace. In other words, human beings place a very low value on a sparrow. He says, yet not one of them falls to the ground without your Father being moved by it. He says, yet the very hairs on your head are numbered. I tell you, you're worth more than many sparrows. Therefore, don't be afraid. So the first line is, don't fear the one who can destroy the body but not touch the soul. Fear the one who can destroy the body and then afterwards destroy the soul in hell. And it's like, oh, that sounds terrible. But then he says, but know this about the one who has the power to destroy both body and soul. Yeah, he can, but he will not, because he values you so highly. So the point is, Jesus is saying the highest good that God embodies is that God could do something that he would never do. He says those who kill the body, who can only kill the body, would love the power to destroy the soul as well, but they don't have it. So don't have reverence for them, because if they had that power, they would use it. But have reverence for the one who could do infinitely worse to you than a human could ever do, but who would never lay hold of that right, because this Father is love. And so Jesus sets that up as being like the highest, like this is what goodness really looks like. And when we embody that in our lives, we embody the fact that we know that there is this good lamb-like aspect to us, yet there's also this aspect to us that is capable of some pretty nasty stuff. We are capable, but we don't, because the
Yeah.
lion and the lamb live together. The shrewdness of the serpent and the innocence of the dove collide and coalesce. And so we don't, and that's really what it is to be a moral person, right? I mean, if you don't have the capacity to do harm, you're not really moral, right? If you don't have the ability to do it, that's not real morality. It's kind of like my cat that is no longer with us in body, but I'm sure is with us in spirit. He never scratched the furniture once. There's not a single piece of furniture or a wall in this house that has a scratch mark on it from that cat. I now have many cats, and there are scratch marks everywhere. It's not that my old cat was like well behaved, it's that he didn't have front claws. Okay? But these cats do. So it wasn't that he was just good and well behaved, it was that he couldn't
He
scratch the
didn't
furniture.
have the tools.
He didn't have the tools. He would still do it, right? He would still, like
Yeah.
scratch his paws on the furniture, but he didn't have the tools to do it. So it wasn't that he was just super well behaved and wouldn't do it, it was that he couldn't do it. And so we're not moral beings because we can't do things. We're moral beings when we're in touch with the fact that we can, but we don't. And there's a power there. There's there's a wholeness there. Like now that I've encountered those darker sides of my being, I really feel like a whole person. And
Mhm.
I actually have this sense of like, I have this deep respect for myself that I didn't
Mhm.
have before, right? Because when you feel like you're not capable of certain things, it really does cause you to disrespect yourself in some ways. Like if you're like, geez, if I was in a situation like that, I don't know if I could step up and take care of business, because you've never had to. And there's almost like this inner shame and disrespect for yourself. But once you see it and experience it and know you could,
Mhm.
there's a respect for yourself. And then once you see that you can deal with it and you can temper it and you can balance it out. The shrewdness of the serpent with the innocence of the dove. You can balance the wolf-like, that predatory instinct, if you will, which is a bad way of saying it, but I don't know how else to say it, with the lamb-like, that peaceful aspect. And today, because of these hard times that I went through and having to face these darker parts of myself and integrate them, I feel like a whole being. I feel like a whole person. And that's really in a lot of ways what the spiritual journey is about. It's about it's about gathering the fragments of the shattered self into oneness and into wholeness again. And these things that you were told you need to remain separated from because these things are evil, they're dark. You don't want these things as a part of yourself. You need to stay as far away from them as possible. And then, you have people who live their whole lives radically abstaining from certain behaviors and then have these disgusting, ugly outbursts where they do terrible harm because they don't know how to deal with the fact that, yeah, this is a part of you. They bury it and bury it and bury it, like toxic waste, and pretend it's not there. But then the cows grazing over top of that buried toxic waste got legs growing out of their heads. I mean, it's like, it has a way of manifesting itself in ways you don't want it to manifest itself,
Mhm.
if you don't integrate it. And so I was kind of like that before with certain things. Some of those behaviors that I tamped down and pushed down, they would come out in uglier ways. And I'd be, whoa, what's that? But now that I've been able to integrate them, it's just a part of who I am. And I feel an inner strength that I did not feel before. And I feel
Mhm.
an inner respect for myself that I didn't feel before. And I feel a sense of competency that I didn't feel before. And it makes life a more beautiful experience. And it happened as a result of passing through darkness. And in passing through darkness, having darkness evoked from within me, and me having to face it. And we have to get over the idea of darkness and light as representing good and evil. Kind of, it's
Mhm.
not necessarily that. That's a mythological way of thinking about it. That's helpful in some aspects, but the darkness and light are meant to go together.
They
It's
are, and one cannot exist without the other. And
exactly.
because we live in 3D duality, there's never ever going to be a time that we are not confronted with the coexistence of
Yeah.
the two.
Yeah.
Whether in conflict or in peace. There
Absolutely.
is still that coexistence. And I've often said, those who have watched me regularly over the years know that I frequently say, I have seen the dark side of existence.
Yes.
I choose deliberately to live in the light.
Yes.
I do. But I too have made kind of in my own spiritual ascension and in my own growth process in my evolution, I've come to realize a couple of things.
Mhm.
I used to say to people, master your mind.
Yeah.
You can control your thoughts. And if you feel like you are being bombarded with negative memories
Hmm.
or something that's painful that seems to dredge up, then you can tell it to get out. Just get out. But then you have to immediately replace it with deliberately replace that void that is created because the universe abhors a void.
Yeah.
You have to replace it with your favorite magical memory or something that you're looking forward to in the future, or just a happy, go to your happy place in mind.
Yeah.
As I would say over the last maybe 6 or 7 years, I have been confronted with emotions that I had rarely tapped into. I knew they were there. I knew they were. And just like the boys that I used to work with in school, they were given credit for not doing something that they had the opportunity to do
Hmm.
that would have been destructive or that would have actually um, been dangerous to themselves and others.
Yeah.
And and so when incident reports would come up and I was, so and so had the opportunity to punch so and so in the face and level him in the playground. And he showed personal restraint. He stepped back. He let staff step in to
Hmm.
handle the situation. The other kid is now in trouble. And the kid that I'm having to write my part of the incident report about gets a check mark in the box
Hmm.
as credit, could have done this
Hmm.
and didn't. You know, I often asked the question about nuclear power, nuclear energy, nuclear weapons. Just because we can, does that mean that we should?
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so, to put it in more, I guess, not generic terms, but not human emotional terms, but what we are capable of in terms of our technology and our advancement and our understanding of science as we grow. What lines are we crossing with cloning, with AI? I think it was
Hmm.
2 or 3 years ago. Um, there were some scientists that had a laboratory in, I believe, Taiwan, and they were working with AI,
Hmm.
artificial intelligence.
Hmm.
Did you lose me, honey?
No, no, no. I'm good.
No. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Um,
Sorry, my Alexa's going off in the background, and somebody's at the door. So.
oh, okay. Uh, and so they're working in, I guess, computer lab, and they've got these two different computers that are basically being programmed and are doing the same thing. And what happened was the programmers noticed that after a while the computers began to communicate with each other, and then after a while they started cutting out the programmers,
Hmm.
and then they developed their own language that the programmers could not decipher, and then they destroyed the servers, both
Hmm.
of them, shut it down. Because when artificial intelligence begins to attain consciousness in whatever oblique or obscure definition we have of that word, multilateral, um, when it begins to think for itself and then begins to deceive and then begins to um, scheme.
Mm.
It is taking on qualities, attributes, uh, elements of humanity
Mm.
that could actually work against humanity
Yeah.
when it thinks through. At the end of the movie War Games, I believe I'm sure I'm just paraphrasing. I don't know if I have the line exactly, but it's the computer basically says the only way to win the game is not to play.
Mm.
No,
Yeah.
so knowing that we have these elements in us, I have in the last and I really I want you to address this for me. I want
Yeah.
your feedback for me, considering your history, what you've been through. You've been to the dark side in your own way. I've seen the dark side growing up in the house that I did,
Hmm.
but even prior to that, and certainly after. Um, and I've gotten to the point now where I allow myself, sometimes, not always, but sometimes when stuff comes up,
Hmm.
which it inevitably does if you let your mind go vacant, even just doing dishes or taking the trash out or raking the yard. Sometimes you're not working focused on something specific. I'm a writer. I'm not sitting in front of my computer right this minute drafting one, composing one paragraph after another, which takes intense mental focus.
Yeah.
No, I'm outside looking at the sky and watching the birdies and the smoke's rising from the fire pit, and and all of it, and stuff will come up. And I realized I don't have to dismiss it immediately or
Yeah.
expel it
Yeah.
immediately. If it's too painful, if it's a lesson that I feel like I already learned and it's just a nasty knock on the door from, oh, remember when this happened and you were so humiliated?
Mm.
Oh, remember when that happened and you could have handled it a lot better than you did?
Yeah.
These things that just crop up out of nowhere, seemingly, I've come to understand as I have attained not necessarily the most healthy, but certainly a more fulsome emotional makeup in my personality. Um, that I don't always have to immediately dismiss that notion.
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes it is knocking for a reason.
Mm.
Maybe there's something that was left unresolved there
Yeah.
that needed to be reconciled. So I sometimes give myself permission to spend a few minutes with that dilemma
Yeah.
and wrestle with it. As you said, we wrestle with our demons. And I use that word in an entirely different way than most people might use it. But,
Yeah.
you and I are really on the same page with that.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, I throw down. I throw down with my demons
Yeah.
and confront them, you know.
Hmm.
Uh, and when I've figured out what it was about this that I needed to deal with, then I throw them out
Hmm.
because the test always precedes the lesson in soul school.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Absolutely 100%. And I agree with you completely. And I come from a similar mindset of, pardon me, my throat's a little scratchy tonight. But I come from a similar mindset in terms of positive thinking. We've talked before in Soul School about both of us having deep respect for the philosophy of science of mind,
Hmm.
the science of healthy mindedness, as William James called it, or the philosophy of
Yeah,
healthy mindedness. And we've talked. Sorry, I don't know. Somebody's going crazy in the living room back here. Okay,
it's
um,
okay.
I don't know what's going on.
I have
Um,
two dogs that could go off in a split second.
yeah,
There is, this is live TV,
yep,
internet, interwebs, whatever,
yeah, and
people are using
it could just be my son coming down the stairs because he doesn't walk down the stairs. He like gallops down the stairs like a Clydesdale. Anyways, what was I talking about? No, emotions and letting these emotions speak. So we've both talked about our admiration for, the kind of New Thought movement, and how powerful that has been in our lives, and it has been in my mind as well, in my life as well. Really, after my exodus from fundamentalist evangelicalism, looking into the works of William James on New Thought, for example, As a Man Thinketh by James Allen, some of these works, and just learning to harness the power of the mind and think more positively. Neville Goddard, all of these different thinkers, it was of great value to me. Really saved me a lot of pain. But I also found that there isn't, and a guy who I've had on my podcast once before, and I'm going to have on again soon, named Mitch Horowitz, who's kind of a historian of New Thought. He's in one of his recent books, Daydream Believer, he talks about the fact that one of the shortcomings of New Thought is that it doesn't really have a theology of suffering. At least most New Thought proponents don't really have a space for the whole theodicy problem. And so that's one of the shortcomings that I've found. And the solution to it, in my experience, has been exactly what you said. It's been allowing that dark thought to just be there for a moment, to look at it, to observe it. Jung said that depression, treat depression like a woman dressed in black. Allow her in, sit down with her, have a conversation, see what she has to say. When she knocks at the door, don't peek through the curtains and hide, and certainly don't open the door and shoo her away. There could be a message in there for you. So sit with it for a moment. Have a cup of coffee with it. See what it's trying to tell you and communicate to you, because it certainly is trying to communicate something to you. Nietzsche said, beware lest in casting out your demons, again, metaphorically speaking, you cast out the best thing about you, right? And so sometimes these negative emotions we experience, we're trained to just kind of immediately, seize hold of them and take control and push it away. But then what happens 10 years later when you never got the message that negative thought was trying to relay to you about this aspect of yourself that needed to be healed? And 10 years later, that thing manifests in your marriage, or it manifests in your relationship with your children or with your parents or whomever, and it brings the whole thing down. I mean, maybe that,
right back down. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, just because something feels negative, we're so trained to think in terms of love and light and goodness, and it all needs to feel good, but bullshit, man. That's just not the way it is.
not the way it is. I've talked about this so much too, because my books are House of Darkness, House of Light, because it was both.
Right.
It was the most enlightening decade of my entire life. It set my trajectory for life. What I was going to study, how I thought, how I interacted, how I, embraced my coalescence with the netherworld, with spirit, with the galactic family, with everything that was opened up to me at that house. Most people would probably consider so terrifying that they wouldn't have stayed for 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 weeks. We stayed for 10 years out of sheer necessity, but also because that's what the universe wanted, or it wouldn't have happened that way.
Right.
So there were things to learn. And then 30 years later, after I processed it and, was able to come to grips with this happened, and oh, isn't that amazing that happened? I'll give you a case in point. I wasn't going to share this, but I think that this is the perfect time and place to do so. I've often said my life, paranormal is completely, totally normal to me. Supernatural is totally natural to me. And yet there are times, there are moments when even I'm surprised, like just taken aback a little bit. And that happened to me this morning at 2:30 when I woke up, which I always do between 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the morning. I go outside, have a chit chat. But my mom's been really suffering with an injury, and she's a couple of rooms away, and I sleep very lightly so that if she needs me, I can be right to her side. And so I got up at 2:30, went into the back of the house, or her room's in the front. And I was walking through the hallway and I stepped over the threshold into her room. I had flipped the hallway light on so that I could see pretty clearly. The light was pretty much on her. And then she was just laying there, sound asleep. I could see her before I stepped into the room. But as I crossed the threshold, I heard, "Hello."
Mm.
And her lips didn't move. I was looking right at her. And for a second, I thought my sister might have been in the room checking on her. And it was too dark in that part of the room and I didn't see her. It was not a voice that I was familiar with, that I recognized. It might have been my sister April, but up until 2:30 this morning, I couldn't tell you one good thing
Mm.
about what my mom's been through. Not
Yeah.
one good thing could I even imagine was coming from her pain, her suffering, uh, and the constant attention
Mhm.
that is required to make sure that she is comfortable at all times. That was the good thing.
Mm.
Knowing she's being watched over,
Yeah.
knowing that I can lay my head down and rest for a while
Mm.
because she's being watched over.
Yeah.
That was the good thing. We're so prone to compartmentalizing everything in our lives.
Mhm.
It just seems to be hardwired into our DNA. And we're all walking around with a big pen and a tablet of post-it notes, and we write bad on this one and peel it off and slap it on here, and
Yeah.
good on this one and peel it off and slap it on there, as we have these life experiences. Um, and What if everything just is,
Mm.
and we take from it what it offers?
Yeah.
What if everything just is and we don't repress our emotions?
Mm.
Somebody walked up to me. I was spouting off at the mouth about something last year at the Upper Peninsula, Michigan Paracon. And this man walked up to me and he said, "Andrea." Now, I didn't know him, but I had lectured earlier in the day, so he knew my name. He said, "What are you so angry about? Or why are you so angry?" And I just looked at him as calmly as I could.
Mm.
And I said, "Because I've suddenly realized there's a lot to be angry about."
Mm.
And he just backed right off. He said, "Yes, ma'am. Okay. I
Mhm.
got the answer."
Yeah.
There's a lot to be angry about. And I am not going to pretend that everything is fucking fairies and unicorns when
Right.
it's not.
Right. Mhm.
It's just not. And I do believe that you are absolutely right, that that is a failing in
Mhm.
New Age teaching,
Mhm.
when you're almost berated and ridiculed if you cannot maintain an aura of perfect light and love around you at all times.
Yeah.
That's not reality.
Yeah.
And that means you are either tuned out, turned off to the world that exists around us,
Mhm.
or you're just willfully ignorant and planting your head in the sand and making sure that you don't get any kind of stimuli that might alter the way you're thinking or what your mood might be.
Yeah.
I find it incredibly cathartic to
Yep.
yell at the television. I
Yeah.
don't throw things at it because that would break it and they're rather expensive. Um, but what I am throwing out is this pent up, built up energy. I'm a Libra through and through. Everything for me is about justice and accountability in this
Mhm.
life. If you did it, God damn it, you better own it. That's just how I feel about
Yeah.
everything uniformly across the board.
Yeah.
And so when I see injustice, when I see something that has, thrown the force off, as it were, I lost my mind over forcing myself to witness the murder of George Floyd.
Mm.
I watched it. I didn't want to watch it. I felt that I had to, that I owed it to him as a fellow human being to commiserate with him, to feel his suffering, to watch him come to his end in such a gross, unjust way. Um, and I was livid, livid. I followed everything that happened all the way through to the conclusion of the court, and I felt for him some sense of peace and solace and satisfaction that the person who claimed his life was held accountable
Yeah.
for that murder. Call it
Mhm.
what it is.
Yeah.
And so that was very painful. That was hard. It was extremely conflicting. I found myself agitated a lot through the course of that. And that's just one thing that happened over just the last few years through COVID that has, like, you know, uh, I can't afford to turn away, to look away, because silence is tacit approval.
Yeah.
Always and forever. Silence is tacit approval. It is a mutable law of the universe. It is as immutable as cause and effect.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Okay.
I agree. Yeah. No, 100%, Andrea. And like, excuse me again. Sorry for my voice. As you said, it's a great shortcoming, not only in New Age spirituality, it's a great shortcoming in Christianity, which is where I come from, but that everything has to be love, light, positivity. Again, you got to hold this aura of perfect peace and love and light around you. In Christianity, it's, always got to have the joy of the Lord about you. And I remember people would say, like, you know, how you doing today? And they would be like, oh, I'm blessed and highly favored. And what you knew they actually meant was life sucks. But they're
Yeah.
just mouthing these words that they've been trained to mouth to be like, oh, and
The
actually
doc-
they were
doctrine and
telling
the
on them.
dogma and the
Right, right,
repetition, and it
right.
becomes habitual. Yeah.
Blessed and highly favored. And you're just kind of like, I'm so sorry, because you knew what they actually meant.
Yeah.
And so we push those emotions down and we push them down and we push them down. And I believe it's from Athanasius, and he's talking about the incarnation of Christ, but he says, Irenaeus or Athanasius, but he says that the unassumed is the unhealed. And of course, he's talking about, Christ taking on every aspect of our humanity. And so Christ takes on every aspect of our humanity in order to heal it. But even just in the individual life, the part about yourself that you don't bring to the surface and embrace is the part of you that remains sick and in the dark and that is going to come back at another later time in life in a form you don't want it to come back in. If you don't let your unpleasant truth speak, your truth is going to speak in very unpleasant ways later on, right? And
Yeah.
so you have to let these things come to the surface. They're there. In Judaism, it's called the Yetzer Hara. Alan Watts called it the element of irreducible rascality. We have these. There is this part of us that's there, and we have to allow it to. We have to allow it to speak sometimes. And sometimes if I'm really feeling pissy and I'm just angry about something, and it happens sometimes, again, rarely, I'm not an angry person. I'm typically pretty zen and in control. But if I'm feeling pissy, I'll turn on the Sex Pistols Anarchy in the UK and sing, I am an antichrist, I am an anarchist. And I'm not an antichrist or an anarchist. I'm a Christian, but sometimes I just need to say those words because I'm like, yeah, I'll put on Rage Against the Machine and whatever and get myself okay. And that's how I get it out of my system. And I'm like, all right. But I also didn't tamp it down. I gave it expression, and I come out on the other side of it feeling a little bit stronger because I embraced that emotion instead of pushing it down. And now it doesn't have to come back later on in an ugly way. It doesn't have to come out in anger towards my kids or anger towards whomever. It comes out in a positive way, And somebody just said in the chat, about Jesus driving out the money changers. Yes, there Jesus
Flipping the
was not.
tables,
Yeah,
just like the housewives of Atlanta.
yeah, yeah. Gentle Jesus, meek and mild, gets pissed off sometimes,
Yep.
and
Yep.
so he does, and he flips tables, and yeah, in the story, he's never recorded as whipping an individual. The whip is used to herd the animals out that they were selling at exorbitantly high prices to those who were coming to offer sacrifice. So yeah, he doesn't hit people with it, but he does use it to whatever. Jesus gets angry. He's a human being, and but he's also said to be the exact representation and image of God the Father in Christianity. So, and another thing is, when Americans began to make pilgrimage to the East in the 60s and 70s, when we first started hearing about, we heard about it first through Madame Blavatsky, and these Buddhism and all but then as it made its way kind of into the larger, pop culture in the 60s and 70s, the hippie movement and stuff like
Oh,
that.
the lexicon exploded then. Yes,
Yeah.
it did.
Right. And so people start going over there to meet these masters and these enlightened individuals, and they're expecting, some dude just like levitating with his eyes closed in perfect peace. And instead they go over there and they find somebody who maybe is doing that for a few minutes, but then behind the scenes he's cussing and smoking, and they're like, wait a minute, that's not the way an enlightened individual is supposed to act.
Yes, it
And they
is.
look at him and they're like, that's exactly how an enlightened individual acts. It's not, what do you think we are,
Yeah.
And it's just, we have, it's really that old, it's really a what would I say, it's really the Christian instinct that's in the West,
Mhm.
that even if it manifests itself in the form of New Age, or even if it manifests itself in the form of another religion, it's that deep, like, puritanical instinct that is just a part of the Western mind, that purity and wholeness and holiness and godliness, whatever shape that takes, looks like this, what we think of when we think of purity and holiness. But it doesn't, man. It's the lion and the lamb. It's the wolf and the lamb. It's the lion eating straw like the ox. It's the shrewdness of the serpent and the innocence of the dove. It's both of these things dwelling
Yeah.
together. It's a
Together.
person. Yes, it's a person who is capable. It's a person who carries a sword but keeps it sheathed because they're under control. That's what it is. That's what it looks like. And we need to free ourselves. We need to forgive ourselves, one, for having having this, these other aspects of ourselves that we're strangers to. And then we need to realize that we never really needed to forgive ourselves, because it's not wrong. It's just, but at first we might need to forgive ourselves because that's how our mind works, right?
Yeah.
And we need to just embrace it. This is who we are. There's nothing wrong with this. This is who you are. It makes you strong,
Mhm.
like let's even say, and it's an emotion like anger. Like I said, I used to always pride myself on being stoic and really in control and never really losing my temper. I used to really,
Chill, baby. Chill. You're chill.
and I kind of am. I really kind of am like that.
You really are.
But but then I would face situations where I needed some anger, right? I needed to be a little pissed off about something, and I didn't know how to, because I never really embraced that side of myself. And so I would either just kind of like freeze like a deer in the headlights, or I
Mhm.
would snap in a real unhealthy way and say something that was really uncharacteristic of me and would have, long-term effects, and,
Yes. Yeah,
implications.
because it shocks people. It
Right.
does. I mean, it does. It shocks people. I've really come out. I am much more outspoken
Mm.
as I've gotten older. I've
Yeah.
gotten to the I don't care
Yeah.
point in my life where
Yeah.
how anybody reacts. My mother is part Cherokee in her
Mhm.
heritage, and she's been telling us this story for years and years. It's a ancient Cherokee parable, and I'm sure it exists in a multitude of different cultures. But it's about the grandfather talking to his grandson, and the boy says, "Tell me the story of the two wolves." And
Yeah.
his grandfather said, "There are two wolves that live within every man,
Mhm.
and they are in conflict with each other. And one is goodness and sweetness and kindness and generosity and just pure love and light.
Mhm.
And the other one is mean and ugly and vengeful and unkind, and just everything that you perceive to be as negative
Yeah.
in your human existence. And they're constantly, constantly at odds. You
Yeah.
know, two rams hitting horns. And the boy says to his grandfather, "Well, if they're at war, then who wins?" And his grandfather said, "It is the wolf that you feed.
Yeah.
It is the wolf that you feed."
Yeah. Absolutely.
So there are, as you said at the beginning of the show, there are 1,000 different ways to come at this, to look
Yeah.
at this in terms of our fulsomeness, our wholeness as human expressions of
Yeah.
emotion. I personally believe that we are in the midst of the paradigm shift,
Hmm.
where all the toxic bullshit has all filtered to the bottom of the cauldron of humanity and has been hit with flamethrowers
Hmm.
from every side,
Yeah.
built on a funeral pyre.
Hmm.
And it is boiling to the surface all that is toxic so that it can be cleansed by the light.
Yeah.
If it didn't exist, what would there be to cleanse and heal so that we can evolve, spiritually ascend, move to a higher plane of consciousness,
Yeah.
and eventually arrive at our realization of oneness?
Yeah.
Everything is one thing.
Yeah.
So, on that note, we got to notice we have 2 minutes left. And
Oh, really? Wow.
I just, I just want to take a moment to say I so enjoy these conversations. Now, when you and I are on the phone and we're just blah, 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 it's this. It's
Hmm.
what we're doing right here.
Yeah.
Um, And there are often times that we have a conversation that I wish that we could have recorded, because I felt that there was something of value in it
Yeah.
for our fellow human beings, those of us that seek us out
Hmm.
in this platform and others.
Yeah.
And so I just want to thank you, Jeff, because I believe that you are a bright light in the firmament and that you are here to help heal the world,
Mm.
and to work hand in hand with you as my partner on Soul School has thus far and will continue to be one of the great honors and privileges of my life.
Well, the feeling is 120,000% mutual, Andrea. So,
I can't count that high. I suck at
yeah,
math.
I was going
No,
to say 100%, and then I wanted to go higher, and I just kept going. So,
no, I can't. No, a bajillion. I like
yeah,
bajillion because
yeah,
it's a made-up word. It's my word. I made it
yeah.
up, or I stole it from someone. But on that happy note, I love you dearly. I'm going to go hop into A World Awakening now, also on KGRA and Dead Air and lots of other places. But I love you dearly, and I love all of you. And thank you for joining us tonight on Soul School. And with that, I can say, class dismissed.
Peace.